All right. So third time's the charm, guys. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for making the time. We have a very interesting call today. We're hosting Raiden Network. They're working on very, very interesting projects in the staking industry. We've been in touch with them for a while, but I think it's more than appropriate for right about the time that you guys need to meet them. So without further ado, obviously, like always, we have Ben and Ariel from our grants committee here, just to make sure things are running smoothly. We have Adam joining as well. But without further ado, it'd be great if Elias and Aris could say a few words about who they are and what brings them here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Ran. Hello, everybody. I'm Elias, and this is my co-founder, Aris. Together, we're working on Network, and today we're going to talk to you a little bit about some things that we've been working on with regards to SSV, covering a proposal that we're coming forward with. But before we get into all of that, like a little bit of background about myself and Aris. So I spent the last couple years working with the Bison Trails team, and then thereafter, after the Coinbase acquisition, with a broader Coinbase team in the infrastructure space as a protocol specialist. So covering basically being the subject matter expert with our team about anything relating to the infrastructure space that we were operating in and public networks. And before that, I spent about 3 years with Decentral Park Capital, started as the first hire there, built the research and product function, and then went on to be subsumed by the infrastructure layer of Web3. And I'd love Aris to also give a little bit of background about himself.
Mine completely different. In previous life, I built a social network with Jeremy Clarkson, and after that, I did AI for insurance. And right about a year ago, I actually had a chat with Elias, and I was very interested in the space. So started reading up and made the switch. Now, yeah, everything is data technology.
And also fun fact, we know each other for like the longest time. We've been friends for like something like 15, 17 years, way before Bitcoin existed, I suppose. So that's I guess the fun trivia for today and about ourselves. Excited to be here.
Great to have you. Fun fact about us, Adam and Alon have known each other for at least 20 years as well. So we hope it's a good recipe, but only time will tell. All right, cool.
We're much older than that. I think it's almost 30 years, but never mind.
But who's counting?
I need to find new friends. That's been too long. Right.
Awesome. Elias, do you think let's get started then.
Awesome. So first, we're gonna cover a little bit about what we're building with Aris in Rated, and then we can get on specifically to kind of like the tangents and the surface areas that we see for collaboration between Rated and SSV. So all the work that we're doing at Rated can be summarized by the title that you see on the screen now, and that's Reputation for Machines. And what does that mean? It basically encapsulates an exploration of the data around the infrastructure layer of blockchains that we think is at the moment very poorly contextualized and not so well explored. It's a problem that I've been stumbling upon throughout all these 2 years that I spent working in the infrastructure space in Web3. And we think that if we're able to unlock this well-contextualized layer of data around the infrastructure strata of the industry, we can enable powerful applications and new product creation, both in the financial realm and otherwise. So reputation for machines can be broken down into 3 main components as we see it. The performance of these machines, the risk that these machines bear, and the externalities that they produce in the context of their networks, whether they're positive, negative, or whatever else that might be. And we have started I'll get more into kind of like the path dependency of how we got here. But we're starting from proof of stake networks and looking at validators specifically with Ethereum. But we think that what we're working on can be sort of that approach to the infrastructure layer can be extended into all kinds of public networks that are adjacent to the Web3 space, including Oracle networks, including relayer networks, including relayer bridge networks, and so on. So we're very excited to be on this journey, and we're only on sort of the precipice, right? The first step of it. Ari, can we move on to the next slide, please? So let's talk a little bit about the problem, which I think I touched on a little bit before as well, but I think it's worth spending a little bit of time to understand, like, what is it that we're solving for. So the problem that I continued stumbling upon as I sort of navigated the infrastructure space in Web3 was that not only there are no well-defined data pipelines to access rudimentary but essential information like how many rewards has this validator earned, or what's its path-dependent history in the network, or what is that history in comparison to the rest of the network. It was not easy to find this information, and the problem became increasingly more pronounced the further down the pecking order of networks you went. Insofar as market capitalization goes, insofar as developer mindshare and developer tooling goes, and so on, the problem becomes increasingly more pronounced. But that's kind of like a first order problem. The second order problem, which is perhaps a little bit more insidious and not so obvious, is the idea that how people perceive things like performance and things like risk differs wildly. So you speak to different operators, different researchers, different home stakers or whatnot in these networks, and you ask them, hey, what is performance to you? You're very likely to get n different answers, right? N being the number of people that you speak to. And so to me, that looks like a unbounded subjectivity, which also cannot be the case, right? Because these networks are largely deterministic, and I get that, like, performance and risk and like the whole sort of reputation area is a largely subjective thing, but it cannot be that subjectivity is unbounded, right? And so this is akin to that saying where people see different parts of the animal. Ari, can we go to the next slide, please? But there is actually a whole animal, right? And that's the whole picture that you see on your screen. And this is pretty much where we're coming from and what we're trying to achieve, right? We're both working to make these data pipelines well-defined and easy to access and expose information for the various networks that we engage with for their benefit. But we also want to build basically on that social layer and help facilitate social consensus around what these different but very important metrics, how they should be contextualized, right? And so, Ari, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I can still see the elephant. Is my screen stuck, guys, or is it? Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So the first network that we applied ourselves to is Ethereum, and we largely did that work. So we started with Ethereum because there is a path-dependent story here. Back in November 2020, I did the data challenge for the Madasha testnet that the Ethereum Foundation put up together with my colleague from Coinbase Seed Shaker, and we won silver, I think, in that challenge. And as part of it, we basically took all the data that we found in the Madasha testnet and run basically a long analysis of the testnet's history. And the thing that captured my attention and imagination the most was, hey, like, this performance thing, how can we measure it? And how come it's not very easy to define. And so kind of started pulling on that thread, and then one thing leads to the other. But also from a high level perspective, Ethereum is, I think, inarguably the most important public network in a Web3 blockchain context that exists out there today. Ethereum has the most developer mindshare. Ethereum has the most developers. Ethereum has the most applications and value that it secures on the application layer. And it has been a trailblazer through and through, including, the really exciting developments that are coming up in its roadmap, which is the merge. And so once the merge actually takes place, you live in a world where you have hundreds of thousands of validators that are composed of, a handful of entities and thousands of home stakers that will become the security layer for all that application logic and asset value that exists on Ethereum, right? And we thought that it is the right time, and the network benefits from having well contextualized and largely open visibility into the network's infrastructure set, how this is performing, how it is distributed, and how it evolves and has evolved over time. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what we've built so far is a network explorer of the infrastructure set of the beacon chain. We're looking at validators at the index level, and then we're composing all these different indices with different methodologies up to the entity level. When these entities are well contextualized on-chain, we tap onto the on-chain data like the Lido smart contracts or the Rocket Pool smart contracts, and from the logs we get data about which indices belong to these entities, and then compose them together in different groupings, right? So in this screenshot, for example, you see, Rocket Pool, which is composed of all of the indices that map back to Rocket Pool operators. And so if you can actually click on the screenshot there, maybe we can take like a quick walkthrough of the rated.network fronted. I think this would be a much more interesting viz for everybody. So what you see here is basically our landing page, where we're looking at two slices of the network. One is a contextualization by entity, and the other one is by deposit address. So if you toggle deposit address, then you'll see basically a stack ranking by stake mass and network penetration that belongs to each of these specific addresses. And then you see a network penetration column. You see the client distribution. We're using like a Sprouse block print module to basically do fingerprinting on the different clients and figure out through their proposal pattern what sort of clients they're running, and thereby we can also compose a client diversity metric on all of these different entities. And we're also tracking participation, that is uptime, and then a composite effectiveness rating, which we think is sort of the tip of the spear of all the work that we're doing. And we introduced more recently a feature where we have these dots next to the effectiveness ratings, which basically tells you where your validator ranks according to the rest of the network. So if it's a deep lime green, you're probably in the top 20% entities or deposit addresses in the network. And if it's dark deep red, you're probably in the bottom 20% of performers. Now, if we go back to the entities approach, then you see all these different entities that operate on the beacon chain. And then if it's a pool that has open data and so on, we can actually also dig a little bit deeper into how the entity operates, who makes up the entity. So in the screen right now, we're seeing Lido and all of its operator set, which we're drawing from Ethereum logs and the contracts that Lido has up to manage basically delegation of stake into these different operators. And then all the way to the right, you see the effectiveness rating of each of the participants of the Lido set. Now, if we want to explore a little bit deeper into what's happening, let's go to Blockscape, for example. From what you saw, it was deep lime green. So if you go down to the bottom, it will probably have like a pretty good score. It's indeed in the top 5% of operators on the 30-day view. If you take a look at the bottom at the top right, you can click on different time series views and get the summary statistics and some time series views in different slicings. And then we have like a bunch of data about all of these operators, including the components of the effectiveness rating, right? Which is largely the participation rate of a validator. So this is how many rounds they were actually live in and they were testing. The inclusion delay, how quick or how slow rather they are in getting these messages included in the network. Promptness, especially post Altair, is rewarded disproportionately, or rather I should say that lateness is penalized disproportionately. The network has become harsher and it probably will become increasingly harsher because liveness matters to the Ethereum network. And then we have correctness, right? Which is the spec has changed and we have like a pretty extensive section on our docs where we're talking about the methodology that we started with, the methodology that we evolved in Altair. And perhaps it's interesting to note here that as I alluded to before, we don't want to come from a position of high authority and say that this is the way that things should be rated in air quotes. But we also understand that it is really difficult to herd cats, if you will, if there is no sort of benchmark to coalesce around. And so the process that we've taken so far is that we are the proposers of a methodology, but then we leave it open to people to actually like provide input. And we've had some incredible participation and input from different people. All this activity is happening in our Discord at the moment that basically help us harden the metric itself and also how we think about it, right? And we see this as only kind of the beginning of a longer conversation about a effectiveness rating, but then also like all kinds of different contextualizations of performance in starting from the validator index level and growing into the whole entity level thereafter. And if we could go back to the presentation, please.
Oh, no, wrong. Yeah.
Beautiful. And next slide, please. All right. So should we take
Elias,
a pause
before we jump, I do have a few questions, if you don't mind, just about you. You presented a lot of interesting topics. Obviously, the pain points are evident and real for all of us, so we can definitely relate. Just off the top of my head, the first thing that comes to mind is, how do you guys account for externalities in the sense that, let's say, obviously it's something that it needs to be mentioned, but let's say a provider, a staking provider that goes offline because of force majeure, because of something that is very uncharacteristic and something completely out of the blue. Is there a way for you to account for those hiccups? You take them into consideration?
No, not for now, and it's not something that's very like high up in our pre-order. The reason being that we want to remain as live as possible. So we want to be able to update the scores that we produce and the contextualizations that we produce, ideally on a block by block basis. So we think that things can start getting very leaky, at least if this is kind of like the first thing that we attack, right? If we kind of let for a lot of human subjectivity to seep through. So the way it's an interesting question, because I think I forgot to kind of make a reference into the philosophy of how we've approached at least the first exercise of building those scores. And the methodology that we want to build, we think need to be generalizable, legible, specific enough, and not super sensitive as well, right? Like they need, if something happens, they need to have like a time decay function that basically, if what we're building towards is eventually powering downstream applications with this data and these particular scores, then it makes it an order of magnitude easier to integrate if the scores are not super sensitive,
Mhm.
right? But
Yeah.
also like live and fresh and so on, and then you can
It has
take
to
your
think
pick
like a
between.
machine in a sense. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And this is the whole where the whole reputation for machines tagline or headline, if you will, comes from. It's reputation for the machines, i.e., the validator, but it is also reputation that will be ingested by machines, right? So we're feeding it to machines, and the context is from and for machines.
Yeah. The
So
reason
I
why
don't.
I'm asking, obviously, is because of the subjectivity that we do see in other sources, which is not, it's something we're quite accustomed to or used to by now. You know, we take that into account and we use source A or B as reference, considering their subjectivity. So that's why I had to ask it. You know.
It makes total sense. And you also touched on the externality point, which is like, of course, downtime is an externality. We like post merge, and this is one of the things that we'll be working on in the coming month or so. We see a world where MEV will start playing like a much bigger role than it is now, especially insofar as the infrastructure set goes, right? And so how a validator handles MEV and what type of MEV they're allowing and facilitating through their system, that's where we think kind of like the real interesting externality, and where we can help sort of like harness that subjectivity and sort of classify it, right? Like, is a validator only facilitating backruns and front runs, or are they sandwiching and multi-block reorging the chain, right? These are like, both are fall under the MEV umbrella, but they are different types of MEV insofar as the interaction of the validator and the application layer goes. So there's a lot to be unearthed and contextualized there.
Yeah. I'm sorry for taking up all the time. Just I have a lot of questions. This is right
Please go
down
on.
our alley, you know. I'm really curious. You keep on mentioning the fact that it's something that you need to explain. So your matrices, the way you account for these performance matrices, and it's based on, I'm not gonna, a vision or some sort of. There's what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of education that needs to be done in order to achieve what you guys are planning to achieve, or more specifically, there needs to be some sort of an industry standard of the way you calculate it per block or per whatever matrix. I'm not gonna, I wish I could, but we're not gonna dive into details. What I'm wondering is, how are you going to tackle this and explain to people on the educational side? This is the agenda. This is what we think needs to be done, and this is why you guys should be adopting it. That's more for the average Joe listeners.
Yeah. So there's a few things there. One is choosing the right audience, right? So first addressing the audience that needs the least education about these subjects, right? Because in this infrastructure space, people have like a relatively high level of understanding of all the different parameters that make each of the networks, right? Because we're talking largely about operators. And operators know all the nooks and crannies of operating a validator, of operating a cluster or an SSV, of operating like full nodes and so on. So there's one part there. The other part is working in a very open and transparent way. So we already have like a very well contextualized documentation. Down the line, we have plans for opening up a forum so that, the conversation that happens in our Discord doesn't get lost in like the Discord timeline, but is like nicely indexed, and there's issues that are open and in discussion that people can follow and participate on. The third thing is definitely education and outreach. So things like, I guess, we're doing today. So thank you for being part of the and encouraging it even. And the fourth thing is building something that is useful to others, right? So listening to what potential downstream integrators, where their needs are, what they're looking for, whether this is, ssv network, or whether this is someone like Nexus Mutual, or whether it is a liquid staking pool. I think you gotta build something that is useful and relatively intuitive, and that becomes the lever for also downstream users to become educated, but from from a self-prompt rather than, you know, and one directional sort of effort coming from outside and going outwards, right? So we want this education process that you're talking to be a dialogue more than anything.
Got it. Now you can move on to the next part. I'll mute myself, I promise.
Awesome. No, thank you. These were all super interesting and valuable questions. So thank you for asking them. So I guess if we can go to the previous slide real quick. So this next section is about basically an overview of the proposal that we put together and submitting to the SSV DAO. Why we're doing this and what the proposal is about, and then I guess we'll go into Q&A with all the great folks that we have on the call today. So we did this, and the reason why we came up with this proposal and we're on this call today is that we're very committed to basically going as deep as we can in the whole Ethereum infrastructure stack, right? And DVT is one of the things that are coming up in short order, particularly as the merge actually takes effect, and makes the Ethereum infrastructure stack orders of magnitude more robust and hardened, right? So I'm assuming that everybody has context on how DD and SSV works in particular, and we also think that there is a pretty large and very interesting surface area for the output that we produce and the direction that we are moving towards, and what SSV is putting together, right? So at a very high level, you can imagine users of SSV benefiting from the effectiveness scores that we produce as they choose how to put together their SSV clusters. You can imagine that down the line, this can be an automated process, right? Through like an algorithm that takes input from Rated and then puts together SSV cluster, but also like just bringing it a little bit closer to the present, just visibility, right? Visibility and observability, and all of these good things, so that we're able to see what's happening in the network, look back in history, contextualize it really well, and then learn from it and continuously improve thereafter. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. What we have put together is basically a 3-phase proposal. We're only focusing on phase 1, and phase 2 and phase 3 are, if you will, illustrative. We think that there's like a lot of interesting things to explore there, but we also think that we'll learn a bunch from engaging in phase 1, and all the learnings that phase 1 produces can then bleed into not only refining, but even potentially expanding the scope of phase 2. So as you read the slide and as we kind of like go over the logic behind it, please keep that in mind. So the proposal that we put together is about building SSV observability and cluster rating on Prater network on the rated system, right? So on our front end, and there's also an API layer that we're working on that we haven't been super public about, but we already have a few savvy people actually finding their way on our API and building, you know, dashboards and other things off the back end of it. So it includes us building support for the Prater testnet, exposing all the contextualizations that we do for Prater, that we do for the beacon chain for Prater, and then having a dedicated section that looks at basically the things that the SSV Explorer does, but then added with a context layer on the effectiveness scores and all the other data that we produce on both the front end and the API. Through that process, we'll build basically all the pipelines, the data pipelines, the ETL pipelines, the methodology pipelines in order to make basically supporting an SSV contextualization post-merge just an order, a marginal step rather than a radical step, right? This is basically just, you can think of it as a learning experience, but you can also think of it as like a merge readiness exercise. So in this exercise, we also want to do research and see if there's other interesting contextualizations that we're missing, so that we're able to enrich kind of a SSV specific cluster score that goes beyond the just simple average of the four validator indices that make up an SSV cluster. And there's a conversation to be had because timelines are always changing. And when we started talking about this this proposal with Adam and a few other folks, the merge was maybe 4 to 5 months out. Now a little bit of time has passed, but the timeline is also kind of becoming shorter for when the merge is going to happen. So maybe there's a conversation to be had about bumping up the merge transition in this phase one, so that it's kind of like a one realized pipeline of things. But perhaps it's also worth talking a little bit about other things that this exercise that we're talking about now can unlock. And besides the mainnet transition, when that time comes, are things like integrating the SSV specific cluster scores and other information about how the SSV network operates, and also drawing information from the exporter node and so on, whenever that's kind of like the spec is complete and it's fully functional, and feeding it back into the SSV app. There's advanced analytics and upgraded SSV scores that we could be thinking about. And then down the line, there's potentially scope to build applications to feed back into the SSV smart contract layer, or go back to kind of the automated or assisted cluster creation process with data from us and then pipelines from SSV. So if you all want to have a look at the proposal, Ari, could we please go to the next slide? Thank you, sir. So the proposal is up on the SSV forum, and there's a pretty detailed explanation about the thought process behind it and the various phases of it. Next slide, please. And this is a table where we're itemizing basically everything that entails a phase one, and then we've gone through a similar exercise into a phase 2 and 3. Again, reminding everybody that these are there for relatively illustrative purposes, but also like to directionally guide us as to what the most desired outcomes of phase 1 should be. Next slide, please. That's pretty much it, and I'm eager to leave as much time as we can for Q&A, because I think that's going to be probably the most interesting part of today's call. You can find us on rated.network and at ratedw3b on Twitter. Thank you very much, and I look forward to discussing this all with you.
This was great, Elias. You can't hear me clapping, but yeah, we're clapping over here.
Help me out.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
By the way, the presentation as well as the proposal are very well crafted, drafted, and organized. I'm sure it'll be very easy for anyone who wants to deep dive into this to see it. I have, like always, a lot of questions, but I'll let the others ask a few questions before I jump in. I'll let Ben from the grants committee take it away.
Yeah, cool. So thank you very much. Brilliant presentation. I loved the storytelling behind it. So that's really great. Thank you very much. Very, very basic question. So I'm just wondering, how do you guys differentiate from other on-chain intelligence and analytics service such as Glassnode, Block Analytica, or even things like Ethereum Pools Twitter account reporting on slashing events stuff? And maybe in addition to that question, is it purely like very sophisticated data science, or are you building something very unique, different from that?
So there's various ways in which we differentiate. First of all, we purely look at the infrastructure set, right? So we don't look at or at least not yet, we're not looking at transactions. We're never going to look at transactions in like an Etherscan type of way, or we're not going to do like time series like Glassnode does. We'll only look at transactions and block value, for example, insofar as it helps define that whole reputation concept, right? So insofar as how a validator or how a pool handles MEV, right? And create these contextualizations and do it over time. We're also not doing real-time analytics and alerting, right? Like where we operate is we're building this reputation layer that is also is time updated on a block by block basis, but is also not super time sensitive, right? So that people like Nexus Mutual, for example, who we're working with, offering our data downstream to them to help power pricing for a slashing and downtime insurance product that they're coming to market with, and also like act as one of the sources of truth that they have for events on the Beacon chain. Down the line, I think defensibility and sort of uniqueness is enhanced not only by this like ruthless almost focus on developing reputation layers and reputation methodologies with like an open source first and community first approach, but also by network breadth, right? So by having by contextualizing all kinds of different networks through the lens that we are today. And obviously creating the data pipelines at the same time to make it the easiest possible for smart contract systems, for example, to ingest our data, right? And not having just not being a single company API that can, rug pull in a moment's notice and without checks and balances, but actually create redundancy and minimize trust as much as we can. But this is like a longer roadmap thing.
Great. That makes sense.
I'm curious to ask about, sorry, Ben, about your ideas or general vision towards commercializing this service. So what's your next plan in terms of making money out of it, if you have anything of sorts at this point in time?
So right now we're exploring. We don't have any concrete plans. We're planning to basically create value for the adjacent systems that we work with and offer value towards on a grant basis for the foreseeable future. We don't want to lock ourselves in any business model until we know that what we've built is like truly valuable and creates a ton of value for the people that we work with, right? We think it's premature and maybe even irresponsible to have like a concrete view of the world while we're just a few months into exploring it. The larger, longer vision where we would like things to go towards is to basically abstract ourselves from being sort of the operator of both the methodologies, like the sole proposer of the methodologies, but also the data pipelines, right? But that's like a much longer roadmap, which we still can't be fully confident about because it doesn't, we feel that it would be putting the cart before the horse, right? First, it's exploring the space, then it's building valuable products, and then once you're there, products and integrations, then you can make a sober call on whether this is viable or not.
I have another question, if you don't mind. In terms of your growth, I'm sure you're looking for. You mentioned a few different types of users that you'll be attracting, both on the educational side as well as the growth side. I'm wondering also because we're trying to experience a similar type of growth. who or what kind of user slash developer are you guys interested or looking for at this moment?
It's a really interesting question. So the vision that we have is that there are multiple, I guess, a platform sort of sense, there are multiple sides to what we're doing and multiple different interfaces, right? So one type of user is network DAOs and or foundations that need this observability in their networks, and they want to sponsor offering this data to their network constituents. The second type of user is the network constituents themselves, right? So like from the home stakers to the hobby operators and so on that don't have crazy observability, and they can also really benefit from contextualizing their own performance versus that of the broader network. The third type of user are larger players like liquid staking pools, for example, insurers or lending type protocols or applications and so on that can basically compose all of that data in interesting applications that drive value back to node operators and stakers, right? So either by powering pricing or by powering premia, or by composing down the line interesting configurations of validators in like a staking type index that is guided by an effectiveness rating or by an externality rating when we get to the point where we develop it, and so on. So at the moment, these are sort of the three main groups of users that we're looking to engage in, that we are actually engaging with.
I have a follow-up question regarding it. It is something that I talk to my team about quite often. It's about where you want to position Rated in the ecosystem of crypto. So what I'm wondering is more along the lines of your vision. Do you envision Rated as being the #1 source of truth regarding anything that has to do with the infrastructure behind Ethereum or whatever other chains that you'll choose? Or will it be more along the lines of, you mentioned Nexus Mutual is using Rated in the background to offer their users a better service? It's usually either or. Do you have a vision in mind for that?
I don't see them necessarily as an either or thing. First of all, we want to be and remain credibly neutral so that we offer this value that we offer, especially where we're coming from, which is kind of like being the guardians of subjectivity, the guardians of reputation and so on. We have to, if we are to actually offer something valuable, we have to like maintain a credible neutrality stance and position in the ecosystem, right? And that's like a very delicate thing to actually navigate, as you all probably have seen and experienced and so on. So that's part #1. Part #2 is that powered by that, we want to be the most trusted source of anything that has to do with reputation as it pertains to the infrastructure layer of all of these networks, right? The trusted data source that is open to contributions and community participation, because we think that there is no one party that can capture this subjectivity alone, right? That's kind of a juxtaposition. Like no one is unboundedly rational, so that they're able to encapsulate like what everybody else thinks just by themselves. So we want to nurture that and maintain it so that we can credibly say that we are the most trusted source of reputation related data as it goes to infrastructure, but we also want to do it in an open and inclusive way, right? Where we're allowing the most relevant people, the people that are impacted the most downstream by the contextualizations that Rated builds and offers to the world, to actually have input into what we're composing and offering.
Understood. Ben, I have one last question. I'll let you slide in a question if you have anything before. Otherwise,
go ahead. Please go ahead.
All right. The last question is something that on a personal note, I like to hear, not necessarily because it might benefit ssv, the network as a whole, but just for my own personal knowledge. What's next for you guys? What are you guys planning? What are you going to do in the next couple of months?
So we obviously have, with the merge coming, that's the thing that we're focused on the most. So we're working on a spec that constitutes like what it means for Raiden to be merge ready. I can't talk too much about it, but like I think I let a few crumbs over the course of this call. This includes kind of contextualizing what it means to offer MEV data now as they're handled by validators in different kind of frames of reference within that sphere. Maybe it has to do with execution client contextualizations and then figuring out how larger set of operators now are distributed in that sense as well, and then composing it all upwards into kind of an effectiveness rating. So a lot of effort and a lot of our energy goes into this, as well as kind of things that are close to Ethereum but not directly Ethereum related. So testnet work on Ethereum, potentially working on Gnosis chain, these types of work items, and then we have like a longer roadmap, which would take a bit of a longer time to go through. But insofar as the next 2 months go, this is where most of our energy and time will be focused on.
Sounds like you have a lot of work ahead of you. Sounds like it's going to be an interesting couple of months for you guys. But before we wrap things off, just on a personal note, the first time I saw Raiden Network was right about when we were discussing or considering client diversity as a marketing value proposition. I think that on a personal note, if anyone is interested in understanding how the client diversity looks, who manages what, how that changes over time, the dashboard will definitely give you exactly what you're looking for. It helped me a lot in understanding who's doing what and shifting where. So on a personal note, very, 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 very useful for us.
Appreciate it, Aaron.
That's it. No more questions from my end. We'll make sure to release this video when it's ready, when Dean is done with the editing, to the community. I'm sure they'll have a few follow-up questions for you guys. Make sure to hit you up on Discord or Twitter. We definitely look forward to the follow-up call with you guys to see the development, to see where you guys stand. Next time will be more Ben talking, I guess, and less so me, but it'll be extremely excited to see what you guys have planned for us. Sounds like a very interesting project and definitely something that we could all use and need.
Appreciate it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.
Aris. Thank you, Elias.
Great call.
Thanks, Ben.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
All right.